Hello, and I'd like to welcome everyone on behalf of myself and my co-organizer and colleague Tal Goldfajn from Spanish and Portuguese to our second Conversations on Translations event this semester. Once again, I'd like to acknowledge the support from all our colleagues in HFA, the Department of Languages, Literatures, and Cultures, Comparative Literature, Spanish and Portuguese Studies, Translation Center, Afro-Am Studies, the English Department, Jewish and Near Eastern Studies, and the MFA program for poets and writers here at UMass. I want to remind the audience, which includes attendees from almost every continent, to write their questions in the Q&A, and we aim to end the conversation by around 6:30, and we'll do our very best to get in as many questions as possible. Tal and I will be being helped from with the Q&A with our grad student and tech genius, Rafael Freire. It is my great pleasure and honor to introduce our distinguished guest, Ngũgĩ Thiong'o, Distinguished Professor of English and Comparative Literature at the University of California, Irvine, and one of the greatest writers of the 20th century. Novelist, essayist, playwright, journalist, human rights activist, and translator, Ngũgĩ has held positions as visiting professor of English and comparative literature at Yale and New York University, and was the five-college visiting distinguished professor of English and African literature in 1991. In 2019, he was awarded the Erich Maria Remarque Peace Prize for his enduringly influential book, Decolonizing the Mind, The Politics of Language in African Literature, about language and its constructive role in national culture, history, and identity. In 2016, we welcomed Ngũgĩ at UMass as the speaker for the annual Troy Lecture Series sponsored by the UMass English Department. His many books have been translated into more than 30 languages and continue to be the subject of books, critical monographs, and dissertations. Ngũgĩ will be discussing his most recent work, The Perfect Nine, a reimagining in epic poetry of his Gikuyu people's origin story. Originally written and published in Gikuyu, the book was translated into English by the author for its 2020 publication. In March 2021, The Perfect Nine was the first work written in an indigenous African language to be longlisted for the International Booker Prize, with Ngũgĩ becoming the first nominee as both author and translator of the same book. I'll begin the conversation with a question, and then Tal and I will go back and forth for about 5 questions, and then we'll turn the rest of the event over to the audience. So my first question is, if we consider all translating as rewriting, creating something new, given the influences of the oral tradition in writing this epic, where you're remaking your people's origin story once again, were there certain aspects of the Gikuyu version that you felt carried over more satisfactorily than others in the English text? Things perhaps to do with the sound of the languages, the conceptual notions, and so on. And how did you tackle these challenges?
Yeah. First of all, we talk a bit about translation, because I revere the practice and philosophy of translations. Yeah, I am, for example, really opposed to the hierarchy of languages and cultures, particularly brought about by colonialism. One language or set of languages are assumed to be more of languages than any other, or to become kind of aristocracy of languages, and others are somehow below them. I believe all languages can benefit each other through a network of equal give and take. And I believe that translation can play that role. In fact, I go so far as to describe translation as the language of languages, yeah. Now, as a common language of languages, yeah. Now, but each language, what's interesting about languages, and that's why I love really languages and I advocate for their equality, because each language has its unique musicality. Whether it's English, French, Zulu, Yoruba, Kiswahili, or Mandarin, you know, that unique musicality. And when you do translation, what's very difficult in translation, whether you're doing your own work or somebody else's work, is rendering that unique musicality in one language into the musicality of another. Because you cannot, there's no way you can directly translate the musicality itself into another language. So you try to render, it's the spirit of that musicality. I compare languages to musical instruments, and they have something in common because both to the organization of sound. Okay, the piano has unique musicality. If somebody plays the piano, another one plays the guitar, there's no way you can stay to, even if they are playing the same melody, okay? You can tell that's the guitar, the piano, or violin, or whatever, okay? But they play the melody, okay? Yeah. What I find out problematic in music would be if somebody said the piano musicality is higher than others, therefore let us destroy all the other musical instruments and leave only the sound of the piano, right? I find the same with languages. Languages, we can talk, we can converse, and great. And each language has something to offer to the others. But the musicality is difficult to render in terms of the musicality of another. Yeah. Because when you play the violin, you can't reproduce sound of the piano. Yeah, in a violin, on the other way around. Yeah.
So would you compare it, the translation when you were doing the translation into English as a kind of, I don't know, what you're saying makes me think about jazz improvisation, so that you were playing the same tune, but within a completely different kind of mood or a different kind of style. Yeah, yeah.
This is music. So you try to, how do I render this in terms of English? Okay, right? Because you cannot, no way I can get a co-musicality into English, and the other way around, of course, but you can try and render in terms of the other. For instance, let me give you an example. The Kro language is very iterative. The beauty comes in how same sounds are reproduced in a sentence. But English, due to much alliteration, is a little bit awkward, okay? Yeah. But still, you try within English musicality, try to render the spirit of the co-musicality, right? So this is what you strive to do. At least this is what I I try to do in my English translation of my Gikuyu original, Keda Moyuru, into the perfect nine. Let me tell you the difference. For instance, the original title, Gikuyu, and I don't have the book here, I'm sorry. The original title in Gikuyu is called Keda Moyuru. And that in itself has a whole cultural history or memory to it, Keda Moyuru, because it refers to the 10 daughters of the original founders of Gikuyu and of Gikuyu people, Gikuyu and his wife Mombi, okay? And they had 9 daughters, but those daughters were actually 10, not 9. So Gikuyu people, when they want to say 10, somebody say 10 is 9, which is full, complete 9. Yeah, so it's 9, and then the complete 9, which actually is 10. Okay, so I didn't know how do I say that one in English and just bring out all those other connotations in the term Keda Moyuru. So I went for the perfect 9, more because I was actually, believe it or not, because I was learning the piano myself, and there's some chords, they say perfect 5 or something like that, you know. That's how the perfect 9 came as a title, you know. But like saying 9, which has been perfected, and becomes 10, yeah. I don't hear you.
Okay, so thank you, Moira, and thank you, Professor Ngũgĩ wa Thiong'o, for this immense honor, and thank you for all your work. And I'm going to continue precisely with this question of the language, and as Moira mentioned earlier, your crucial decision of writing in your native language, Gikuyu. You have described yourself as a language warrior for marginalized languages. If there is perhaps one issue in African literary studies that seems to be the most closely associated with you, it's probably the question of the language of African literature and the idea that the use of an African language is the most significant means for achieving what you have described as the decolonization of the mind. And undoubtedly, what you were talking about now, the unique expressiveness of each African language. But the choice of language of expression is not always as clear-cut as it may seem. And it raises many interesting questions about language. For instance, when is a language ours? What do we inherit through our languages? And what do we do with this inheritance? The Congolese writer Sonny Lamutanzi, cited in Aileen Julian's article, says, for instance, that any language in which you cry, in which you love, is fully your language. And in a very lively lecture, which was later published in the Literary Hub, the writer Arundhati Roy, talking about the politics of language in India and her own language choice, she asks a complicating question, a question she poses as being almost beyond solution. But I'd be very interested in hearing your thoughts, Professor Thiong'o, on this. How do we determine what is the politically, culturally, and morally appropriate language in which to think and write?
With one word, mother tongue. Okay, yeah. Now, but we have to see this in the context of the colonial situation. In all colonial situations from Asia, America, New Zealand, Australia, and so on, the languages or the mother tongues of the colonized were denigrated in every possible way. so much so that children were beaten or humiliated when in the school compound they were caught speaking their mother tongue. And this is true. It was done to the Irish. It was done to the Welsh. Okay, it was done to Native Americans. So that to Maori people. I read one account of a Maori, I think he was a member of assembly, and he was talking about his own experience or being beaten in the butt until he bled for speaking Maori in the school compound. And this is common in nearly all colonial situations, or in nearly all situations where one people have colonized another. The first thing they do uniformly is denigrate the languages and the naming system of the people they colonized. Let me give an example which is not quite European. Japan. When Japan colonized Korea, 1910 to 1945, they forced Koreans to take on, or at least the elite, to take on Japanese names and Japanese language, right? So it's not simply a matter of, say, European language and others. It's more than a colonial situation. So the intellectuals who come from that colonization of their language and culture, they really have no alternative. I get a bit impatient when people say, oh, English is really my language, and so on. It's not English or French which needs them. It's their languages which need them. And then they can develop their language to such an extent, their language can start having conversation with English and French on equal basis, okay? But I get really impatient with intellectuals from colonized world trying to do also contortions, somehow claim that English and French and so on is somehow rather their language. Why can't they say, let's develop Hindi or Gujarati, and Gujarati can be in conversation with English and French and Russian and Mandarin, right? So in our case in Africa, it is not English that needs the African intellectuals. It's African languages which are in need, which are crying for development, okay? Right, not the other way around. So I become a little bit impatient as I grow older, I presume. I'm now 83, so I'm allowed to become a little bit impatient, you know. But I really do become impatient a little bit. Although I understand why people say that one, because I've traveled the same route myself, okay? I wrote my first 4 novels in English, yeah. So it's only lately where that I, shall I say, I found the light. Yeah. I can't hear you.
Yeah, so I'll come back to this about the light that you found now. Moira will ask you, but there is this whole question of what is the mother tongue, and maybe English is one of them. And maybe, for instance, for this author, Arundhati Roy, she's conceiving of translation as a primary form of creation. But I'll wait a minute and I'll ask you about translation after Moira.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Somebody else? Or?
Yes, yes. So I read where you once said, and I think you said it rather playfully, that the most beautiful sentence in your 2006 novel Wizard of the Crow I believe that's the first book you translated into English from Gikuyu.
Actually, the
Was
second
the
one.
one, the second one, was
Yeah.
the one that read, and I quote you, a translation.
Oh, writing, yeah, translated from Gikuyu into English, yes, yeah.
Yes, yes, yeah. So, and you said the most beautiful sentence in that entire novel was on the cover when it said a translation from Gikuyu by the author. I don't know if you remember having said that, but
Oh, yeah, I used
so,
to.
so I wanted to know, would you agree that when someone translates something from their own language, particularly a self-translation, as is the case in The Wizard of the Crow and The Perfect Nine, that there is a sort of performativity about it, that it has a certain, almost a ceremonial impact as an affirmation of your mother tongue?
Only in a sense. The first affirmation, in my case, was literally writing a novel in my life to know that I could do it. When all the previous years I had thought I could not. So the moment I did it, I felt liberated. It's an act of affirmation. Yeah. And since I did that, something else happened to me. I probably have much bigger respect for English and French and other languages than I had before. Why? Because I've gone back into the history of translations, and I remember there was a time when Western European languages, English, French, German, used to be under the hegemony of Latin, right? And I remember reading how English intellectuals used to be horrified at the idea that anybody could write in English, right? They were saying, oh, how can you put medical terms in English? They used actually very rude words to describe their own languages, okay? Yeah. Until they are coming from under the hegemony of Latin. And you get new crops of writers like Chaucer in the case of English, or for that, but the best known, Shakespeare. And you understand how much of Shakespeare is based on translated texts, either from Scotland or from Italy or from where, okay? Then you know something else, which I can't really appreciate in Shakespeare. His love of English words, right? You find some characters where they seem to enjoy just piling up words, where they find they can say this way or this way. This is clearly somebody who is discovering the beauty and complexity of their language anew, okay? I suspect the Cervantes is the same thing, or this French writer who wrote the Caret Pantagruel, what's the name? Rabelais. It's the same, very wordy, but you can see he's enjoying discovery of his language anew. Oh, I can say this way, I can say this way, I can say this way, So you get that excitement at the discovery of what their languages could do. Yeah, so I have come to actually respect them now more than I did when I used to look at them as these universal geniuses. Yeah, right. Can't hear you.
Yes. Okay. So I want to continue precisely on this line, and the question of the presence and role of translation in your life and work. In your second memoir, In the House of the Interpreter, you tell this wonderful story about your Scottish literature, I think at the Alliance School, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Who said, avoid words with Latin roots. Use Anglo-Saxon word. Above all, learn from the Bible. It has the shortest sentences in English. Jesus wept. 2 words. So follow the example of Jesus. He spoke very simple English, the teacher concluded. You then raise your hand and say that Jesus did not speak English. The Bible was a translation. You're referring to the King James Bible, the King James translation of the Bible. Now, somewhere else, you mentioned that the first book, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that the first book you read in your mother tongue, Kikuyu, was the Bible.
Yes, the Old Testament, actually. Yeah.
Yes, which was again a translation of a series of translations, English, Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and Arabic. And you say there, I was very impressed by that Jesus and all the characters in the New and Old Testament spoke Kikuyu. Garden of Eden spoke Kikuyu. Now, I don't know if, if I'm right or not. I read that the origin of written Kikuyu lay in the translation of the Old Testament.
Yes.
Okay, so fast forward, and many years later, you founded and directed the International Center for Writing and Translation at UCI. And you have described translation, just as you did at the beginning, as the common language of languages.
Yes, absolutely.
To ask you, how do you conceive of translation, and how you have this long intimacy with translation practices? How have they shaped your ideas on the role of translation within language and between languages?
First of all, as I said, one thing I've done is really tremendous respect for languages, any language, although I don't know them all. Okay, I wish I did, what I really oppose, and let me just say it again, is hierarchy of languages and cultures. And I keep on saying there's no language which is more of a language than any other. If you remove hierarchy, actually languages have a lot to give to each other, right? Even within English, look at the impact of King James Bible itself on the development of English language, right? The same role of translation is played among written African languages, right? Especially Gikuyu. As I said, when I learned to read and write, the first book that was readily available was actually an old copy of the Old Testament. And those stories were so engrossing, I could, they were what, now I call them magical realism. Because they're incredible by any standards. Even the question of some people, Daniel being in the, I think, den of lions or some, not him, but either fire burning the whole, and he's not, when he comes out, oh, nothing has touched him. It's really very magical when you come to think of it. Or somebody else, Job was swallowed by a fish, in the belly of the fish for, I mean, you can't imagine something more magical, and which is really very, very captivating. And this has led a big impact on even today. Many of the gospel singers, the themes are largely taken from the Old Testament. This is about Joseph, this is about Abraham, this is about Isaac, this is about those Adani in the den of lions. This is where they get the imagery. Hardly ever actually from the New Testament, but they're off Old Testament. Yeah, even current gospel singers. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, translation really, they do give to each other really, I mean, I read Tolstoy, I like so much in English translation, yeah. And I remember once visiting Russia, and I was talking to some Russian intellectuals, and I told them how much I like Tolstoy, and they thought I had read him in Russian. I said, no, I don't know Russian. They couldn't understand how Tolstoy could be translated into English, how, yeah? because he's so Russian in terms of texture of language and so on. But I know him, to War and Peace, through translation. So I love Dostoevsky, but through translation, okay? So for me, translation among languages is really for me, genuine conversation among languages and cultures of the earth, okay? Yeah. I still like my stories from the I still like my stories from the Old Testament. Right. Yeah.
So let me ask you about this question of audience that you mentioned, right? For whom does one write? I know this is a question that is, a crucial question. Mm-hmm. It was central to your decision to write in Kikuyu. You refer to it in Moving the Center. You write there that you came to realize only too painfully that the novel in which you had so carefully painted the struggle of the Kenyan peasantry against colonial oppression would never be read by them. Shortly afterwards, you said that you did not think that you would continue writing in English. You wrote, and I'm quoting you, "I knew about whom I was writing, but," and then you ask, "For whom was I writing?" So I want to ask you about the audiences of these two, The Perfect Nine books. For whom are you writing each of these two books? And how does the writing for two different audiences also affects what you say and the perspective you offer?
No, the first thing, okay. First in terms of, I'm very clear when I write in Gikuyu, I'm writing for anybody who can understand and follow me in Gikuyu. Obviously, Gikuyu speaking peoples, okay? Just as I'm very clear, when someone writes in English, he's writing for anybody who can read English, but of course, most of those who read English are those for whom English is mother tongue, okay? So for me, I'm very clear about it, but I want to tell you a story of how I came to that. Let me tell you a story of how I came to that very difficult decision. This was in the middle of writing the novel that I call A Grain of Wheat. It happens actually, believe it or not, in New York in 1966. And I had been invited there at an international PEN conference when Adam Miller, I think, was the president of PEN. And they had all these writers, regional guests from, I was a regional guest from Africa. There were guests from Latin America. And there were also writers from communist countries at the time, because the theme of the conference was the writer as an independent spirit. And it really was meant to kind of break these barriers between East and West and so on, So I was there in New York for the first time in my life. I was still a student, Mark. I was supposed to graduate student at Leeds, but but I don't believe I was quite a writer, although I had published 2 novels. So you can imagine I'm among the global mighty, and I'm doing like writers. I don't know what they do. Or they, anyway, whatever. I'm trying to be serious like a writer, okay? Now, the last panel, I remember this, was chaired by Adam Miller, and there were 2 participants. One was a Chilean Nobel Prize winner. What do you call him?
Neruda? No.
Yeah, Pablo Neruda. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. And there was an Italian writer who wrote a book called Bread and Wine. What's his name again? Bread and Wine. I remember his name. I know it very well. Yeah. Anyway, the Italian author of Bread and Wine they were having a conversation chaired by other Mila. I was in the audience, right? The Italian author of Bread and Wine, I just happened to hear him talk about, oh yeah, Ignatius Sloan, yeah. And I heard Sloan say something about the fact there were very few translations from Italian, contemporary Italian into Western European languages, especially English. And then he said, and you know, Italian is not like one of these Bantu languages with one or two words in their vocabulary. Now that touched me a lot. But remember, I was regional guest of Africa, and Africa was under attack from Sloan. Yeah. So I had to speak. I had to break my silence. I stopped trying to be a writer. I now became, I was third for Africa. So I stood up and said, you know, Africa had many languages, and I can assure him they had certainly more than one or two words in their vocabulary. Yeah. The two things happened. One, Ada Miller himself said it was all right for people to praise their own languages, but they don't have to do it at the expense of other languages. Just say how great your language is, but you don't have to say how bad. And you don't have to deny another people's language. And then later at the reception, what is the Latin American writer again? What's his name again? He came.
Neruda?
Neruda, yeah, Neruda. He came. I mean, we're not talked, but he came through the reception, and he came to where I was and shook my hand. We didn't speak very much Spanish or the other way around, so it was just like, yeah. But I could feel as if he was conveying something. I don't know, right? Yeah. So I leave New York having defended the honor of the continent and feeling good about it, except when I returned to Leeds, to my novel. In what language was I writing that novel? But I had just been to New York saying African languages had more than two words in their vocabulary. Yeah? So why am I not writing this novel? It's like, in the end, Sloan had won. So that was a very, very important moment in my life, because it happened at the beginning of writing A Grain of Wheat. Yeah. But it took me another novel, Petals of Blood, to then give up on English as my creative language of novels and fiction and drama and poetry. And I've never regretted it. Yeah. Yeah. And by that, as for Language Warrior, I didn't actually give myself that title. I was given that title by Los Angeles Times. They had a headline once, it's an interview they were doing for me, and it's The Language Warrior. So, yeah. But now really, I fight for all languages, in marginalized languages, in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, because there are marginalized languages also in Europe. Yeah. Need conversation among languages, big and small. And when I came, started the founding director of the International Center for Orientation, and I asked myself that question. Now that I'm in America, where do I start a program? Where am I? I hope so. You begin, knowledge begins where one is. You're going to connect. I'm in America, I'm starting a program of translation and conversation among languages. What's my here? I was in America, right? So here was actually I, Yeah, at the University of California, Irvine. And who were indigenous people in Irvine? They were Native Americans. So my here now is Native American. So our founding program was an invitation to Native American writers and one from Hawaii, right? So the opening event, there had never been so many Native American writers on that compound before. So that's how and then from there, we had the conversation. It was okay then to bring in African American, to bring in Icelandic, to bring in African, to bring Asian conversations and so on. And it's actually worked very well. So well that I came out with a book of theory from experience, and it's called Globalectics. Let me write it. Globalectics. There it is. Yeah. That came from experience in Irvine as the founding director of the International Center for Writing and Translation. And my arguments that from any language can be the center of the world in terms of other languages. It can be Mandarin, it can be Zulu, it can be Yoruba, it can be any language. You can connect to the rest of the world. There's no mystery about it, right? Yeah. And translation, of course, plays help in that conversation among languages. Yeah.
Is this a good time to transition to the Q&A?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I have many other questions. We'll just use them. Yeah, if we have time, we get back to it. Yes, perfect.
Okay, so this is actually a good transition. The first question is by Janice Nodari, and she says that she translated your Globaletics into Portuguese, and she says it's stupendous. Her question is, when an individual is stripped of his or her mother tongue, I have orphan children in mind. How can one decolonize his or her mind? Or rather, how can humanity help this individual grow and develop his or her full potential?
I think the first thing really is if you can make them or them like connect. I get what they do it. Just connect with their mother tongue. What happens is when you connect with the mother tongue, you're anchored somewhere in character. And that anchorage gives you, I don't know, is strength if I connect with other languages. It's no problem. As I said, I have come to appreciate Shakespeare more than I did before because I can see him in his own terms. I can see what he was able to do with English language. And I can appreciate Rabelais, though I don't read French, even the translation, I can see how he plays with words and so on. And it's very, very exciting, yeah. So to connect with language, and not matter how small it is, right? A language is a carrier of so many things, of culture, of knowledge systems, of even sound systems, right? Yeah. And that was a exciting part, to be able to see connection between my language and other languages, you know, yeah. To see a Dinka, for instance, or Zulu, or Spanish, or whatever. So I'm always very excited when my book translates into other languages, right? Because this is the way it should be, yeah. So the key is connect with the language of one's culture. Let me put another way. I don't use this sentence all over. I always say, if you know all the languages of the world, you don't know your mother tongue or the language of your culture, that is enslavement. If you know your mother tongue and the language of your culture, then add all the languages of the world to it. That's empowerment. You know, and I see empowerment of language and peoples. Yeah. So that even connecting with other languages becomes an act of empowerment, not an act of self-negation. Yeah.
Moira, you want to ask the next one? But you're on mute.
Who wants to ask me? No, I don't want to ask myself a question.
Yeah, so yes, we have another question from Yvette and Ndiovo. I can't clearly see it too well. Here's her question. I resonated with the discussion about mother tongues. I'm from Zimbabwe, and I went to a school where we were humiliated for speaking our mother tongues, such that my writing in English is now stronger than my mother tongue.
Yeah.
English was rendered the academic formal language, while my mother tongue was something we did at recess and so wasn't serious. What advice do you have for young African writers who want to incorporate more of their mother tongues in their writing, but feel inadequately equipped to do so because of the colonial educational system?
Yeah. First of all, let me say again, that's a common practice in all colonial situations. Australia, New Zealand, Native America, everywhere, okay? And that's a common thing. In other words, colonization of languages was itself the primary act of colonization, because you hook the mind, okay? Because you can think of what is so common in all situations of colonizer and colonized. Where, okay, let me tell you sort of Irish a little bit. I become an Irish, you know, for the language question, yeah. You know, Ireland was one time, the English started settling in Ireland from 12th century or thereabout, okay? But the Irish were always resisting, okay? In 1596, Spencer, the poet Spencer, wrote a book, A View of Ireland at the present time, okay? Now, Spencer was not just any writer, he was a contemporary of Shakespeare. He was a friend to, you know, he was a courtier, you know, Queen Elizabeth, you know, all that, okay, yeah. He was a friend of Walter Raleigh, who was a close advisor to Queen Elizabeth. Anyway, Spencer, he writes this book, which is a conversation between two characters, one a visiting lord from London, and the other an English settler in Ireland. And they're asking, why is it we have not been able to subdue these people, right? And they come up with a very interesting, yes, all we need to do is get at their naming system, right? We stop them from calling us of marks and O's and all that, right? And language. And then he says, if we do that, the Irish will soon forget who they are. These are not my words, I mean, the words of Spencer. He was very clear about the role of language in a subjugation of the mind of the conquered and so on, you know. So that practice of humiliating people continues to this day in Africa, in Kenya, where I come from. And our captain is asking Kenya government to please stop this business of criminalizing African languages. Why should teachers, an African teacher, now make a child bleed because that child was caught speaking an African language in a school compound, not even in the classroom, in a compound of the school? They are humiliated. They are made to bleed. You know, it's horrible that African government today, I'm not talking about yesterday, African government tolerate this. It's no longer the colonial. African government themselves tolerate the idea of teachers being able to mete out corporal punishment to children. In other words, they make children associate their mother tongues and with pain, with humiliation, with lack of dignity. And by the same token, they come out glorifying English and French. And it's not a matter of knowing French or English, but they are good language in their own right. It's their relation to mother tongue, right? Is it necessary to make a child feel pain about their mother tongue in order to make them, that child, understand a foreign tongue? Really, when you come to them, it is no education of value whatsoever. It's to do with the conditioning the mind of the kid to make them feel their language is somehow rather to associate their language with pain and associate English or French or Portuguese with glory. They associate their language with gory. You know the English word gory, bloody, gory, and there's English and French with glory. So it's glory versus gory, right? Gory for their own languages, glory for colonizing languages, yeah. And that's why I talk about decolonize the mind. That's how my book came about, in decolonizing the mind. This was a series of lectures I gave in New Zealand. And I remember toward the end of the lectures, a Maori girl came and gave me a gourd marked with the Maori symbols. And she told me, I remember these words to this day, you don't even have to know my name, but I want to tell you, you were not speaking about Kenya. You are speaking about us here, Maori people, right? I always remember those words. I reflected upon them, what they meant. And that's why I've arrived at this position where I understand colonialism had the same attitude towards languages. Language was used as a tool of mental bondage everywhere. Even Africans, enslaved Africans, the first thing that was done on the plantation was burning their languages. Some were even killed, hanged in the Caribbean for being caught speaking African languages, right? Even the talking drum was banned, right? But European settlers, they were never linguistically disconnected with Europe, okay? But the enslaved were disconnected linguistically from the continent, and they were punished for it. So not simply a matter of, oh, please give up. It's there was pain and death linked to their knowledge of African languages. The sad thing, and this is what I realized, that we continue, we in Africa and African governments continue with this. Yeah, we have come to, I'm sorry to use this term, but we come to what I call it, normalization of abnormality, right? Yeah. Normalization of abnormality. This is the situation in most parts of Africa, right? Yeah. So to that question. So the key thing is to undermine that normalize abnormality and make that child link to their language, no matter how, at what age, and so on. Even if they know one or two words, something to undermine this a normalization of abnormality. Yeah.
Tal, you want to go for the next one?
Yes, I was thinking, I mean, if we join what you were saying, and the violence and the pain, and the perfect nine is a meditation on beginnings and endings, and the whole issue of memory, which you've spoken several times about language and memory. And I don't know if you know, but the linguist A.L. Becker, who worked on Southeast Asian languages, he had this beautiful concept of lingual memory, which he defined as the stock of remembered prior texts. You both wrote the book in Kikuyu and then translated it. I'm curious to know how you perceived what happened to this lingual memory when you recontextualized your Kikuyu text in English.
So can you say that again? Recontextualize? I lost you.
Yes. We are talking about, I mean, if we are trying to understand what's happening with memory and the whole connection between language and memory, and we're actually doing something which we can talk more. I mean, what are you doing with this first epic in Kikuyu? What is the legacy there? And how is this memory that is very clear in the Kikuyu text, how do you actually recontextualize into the English?
I try, I'm not sure how successful I've been, but I just tried because, yeah, but as I said, the one language into another is very difficult. You cannot try to get a spirit of one language to the other, but you can, like the Russians, it's impossible to translate Tolstoy into English. They couldn't see how it could be done, right? Yeah, a long time ago. So not only try, but as I said, what is beautiful about every language in the world is its unique musicality. But at the same time, each language carries memories of place, of history, and so on. And that's why you find whenever, again, you colonize another place, the first thing you do is change the names of that place. For instance, when the Dutch colonized New York, they call it New Amsterdam. When the English came, they said, no, New York, not New York, it's New York, right? Right? Yeah. But what about the name of the place that was used by Native Americans who lived around New York area? Yeah. I have to theorize this a little bit now in my book called Something Torn and New. It's really about the politics of memory, and language plays a key role. There's some Harvard lectures I gave at that time, Something Torn and New. It's about the politics of memory, but in language, okay? Yeah, because every language has memory, and I don't just memory of history and so on, even knowledge system of the ecology. There's no language, every language, no matter where, is the best equipped in terms of the knowledge of ecological system which produced it, yeah, right? Yeah. So it was to us, I said, what does it mean when you suppress all these languages and all the knowledge system they actually carry, right? Yeah. I remember reading about the Mesoamerica, Maya civilization, and how the Spanish settlers were so, actually missionaries, they were so busy destroying all the books written in that language or the marks they used to write that language, and they did not even bother to read what was contained in them. They just chased around, burning, right? And only one of it called Pop of War, something for the remains a little bit, right? Yeah, the rest were, why destroy this memory? And it's also memory of knowledge systems, yeah, of ecology of the area, the medicine. I mean, so many things are really destroyed, and we do harm to human. Really, destruction of language is really a crime against humanity, really, when you come to think of it, really, yeah. It's like those people who used to ban libraries, yeah, books, ban them, right? Why? When now we know in the little remnants of books in the past, how much they have for us, right?
Professor Thiong'o, the next question was asked anonymously. Given the joy in language that you find in Rabelais, Shakespeare, it would be interesting to hear what you think of Joyce, who tried to put every other language into English, or Beckett, who wrote in French, perhaps so that he could take everything literary out and write without style.
Yeah, James Joyce, I like him very much, of course, as he's brilliant, but this has nothing to do with brilliance, right? It's to do with colonization of the mind, right? Many people have the illusion, Joyce included, it's what I call Joycean paradox, that somehow or other, if you, as an Irish, is writing in Gaelic, you can somehow put in as many Gaelic words in English somehow or other. You are somehow, in a strange kind of way, doing something for Irish, right? And yeah, I know many Africans who think the same way. If I write in French, but I smuggle an African word there and there, I am really doing something. No, Joyce did nothing, absolutely zero to Gaelic, okay? But he enriched English language. And as you know, today there are Joycean societies all over the world. He enriched English, not Gaelic. He was this, somehow. No, he's not. He just helped to show them capacity of English. He's enriching English language, and there's nothing wrong that that's what you should do, but do thinking that you are doing something Gaelic or African languages. Yeah, just do it and say I want to write in English. I'm comfortable with it, and I was from African languages into it, but you are doing nothing for African languages, but everything for English, Spanish, or French, or Portuguese. Yeah. You want to something for Gaelic, write Gaelic, right? You want to sing about Igbo, write in Igbo, in Yoruba, in Zulu, Kiswahili, and then it's probable encourage translation between those languages, between Gaelic and Yoruba, for instance, or between Yoruba and Zulu. In this case, I have a story of mine called The Upright Revolution in English translation. I wrote it originally in Gikuyu as Itueka Rea Moro Garo. You can Google it. The Upright.
I think it's the most translated story in the world. Is that?
Not one, but it's 100 translations right now into many languages of Africa, quite a few languages of Native American language, one Native American language, right? Quite a number of Asian languages and European languages as well. And it's good. I like that, right? That's how translation should be, to enable writing in any one language being accessible in any and all languages, as many languages as possible. Yeah. Right.
So we have another few questions. I'd like to read this one from Shashank Rao. He writes, my grandfather is a writer in the Indian language of Kannada, I'm not sure how that's pronounced, a language he exclusively writes in, even though he can communicate perfectly in English. He says, I always wondered why he never attempted to write in English, and I feel I understand him better now after listening to this discussion. My question is this: how might children of immigrants who have grown up between two cultures and two languages, and who may have lost the language of their parents and grandparents, figure out what their mother tongue is, and how might they reconnect and elevate it?
Yeah, they don't have to, I mean, again, I keep on saying this thing. I don't think we should keep on mourning the fact that they know English. Yeah? Let's take English for granted. But if they want to connect a little bit with their mother tongue or their father's tongue or whatever it is, then to be a conscious effort. Yeah. But they don't have to feel guilty about knowing. They should use their knowledge of English to enable them to connect. Yeah. Yeah. I don't think people should feel guilt about knowing other languages. They should only feel guilty about not knowing the language of their culture. Yeah. But otherwise, knowledge of languages, I think is a good thing. Yeah. Right. I wish I could learn all the languages in the world. Imagine. Wherever I go, you talk to people. You can go to a bar or a marketplace or a place of worship, and you can hear the regular language being spoken by the people. So it's a good thing. Languages, many languages. Okay, let me put another way. I've said monolingualism was brought about really by the European notion of the national state, right? That to have a nation state or a nation, you must have one language. And it's actually it's nonsense, but this somehow or other is all over the world. To have a nation, you must have one language, and often it means selecting one language, one of the regional languages, or the language spoken by the elite as the language. So my answer to that is this: monolingualism is the carbon monoxide of cultures, right? Multilingualism is the oxygen of cultures. Yeah. So monolingualism is carbon monoxide of cultures. Multilingualism is the oxygen of cultures. Yeah.
We have a question by distinguished professor of English, Stephen Klingman, and I'll read it to you. It says, thanks for a wonderful and inspiring presentation. In your essay, The Language of African Literature, you associate writing in Kikuyu with an affiliation of the struggle of the workers and peasantry against imperialism. Today, you have stressed the parity and equality of languages. Is this more about cultural politics or culture and language per se, rather than a political alignment? In other words, have your views changed since the essay was first written or taken a different inflection? Is the parity of languages anti-imperialist in a different way?
Yes, it is actually. But let me put it this way. When you choose a language, you choose a world, okay? So there's a way in which choosing a language, also you're choosing certain type of politics. An example, the majority of Africans in any African country speak African languages. English or French and Portuguese are spoken by a minority in each of the regional communities. So what we call national language in Africa today is the language of the elite, the minority in each of the communities. That's what we call national, right? Yeah, but it does not equally mean that if you choose a Gikuyu, you are necessarily somehow you become pro-workers, right? But it just means one thing. If I write in Gikuyu and the majority of Gikuyu people are working people, I'm giving them a chance to communicate with them, right? But doesn't mean that Gikuyu language per se, in and of itself, will be pro-worker. Gikuyu language can be taken by somebody else and talk about heaven or whatever, right? So, but when you choose a language, whatever, at least you are either including or excluding the majority of people who speak that language, right? In order to choose a language is to choose a world, right? Yeah.
Okay, so next question was actually typed into the chat. So that's where I'm reading from. It's from Basidia Rame, and it says, Professor Thiong'o, I'm from Gambia, where Mandinka is the majority language. I occasionally translate from Mandinka, the official and colonial language, into Mandinka, but I encounter numerous challenges finding equivalents, particularly when it comes to technical terms. How could this challenge be overcome, knowing that the state lacks a clear language policy?
Yeah, okay. First of all, you put, I think, on the right spot, clear language policy of the state. Because in the case of Africa today, the hindrance to correcting the language situation are now African governments. They stand in the way, okay? But languages, remember, can develop. Languages borrow words from each other. Language make up words, you know. There's no language, including English, as has not borrowed words from other languages, right? It's common for languages to share words or vocabularies or whatever, you know, and there's nothing wrong with that, you know. If I write in Mandinka, I would have no problem. If I can't find a Mandinka word for something, I would take it from French or from English or from any other language. Yeah. You know, in other words, languages like, okay, let me put it this way. Languages is like the way we eat food. Yeah? You know, in the tummy, we put it vegetables, meat, also things from external world. You know, we are swallowing it. Huh? And somehow within us, the system works on them, and then somehow they end up actually enriching the body and so on. But remember the things we put in the stomach from the external world. Huh? Languages actually act like that. They can, any language can literally borrow a word from somewhere and somehow turn it into its own body. Okay. Let me tell you one word which has traveled a lot into the Gikuyu language. There's an English word for Gikuyu for table. We say meda. If you ask a Gikuyu person whether meda is, they will fight with you if you say it's not a Gikuyu word. Huh? But meda comes from, I think, Portuguese or Spanish as mesa, right? And passed into Kiswahili as meza, and passed into Gikuyu as meda, right? There it is. I use it all the time, meda. Okay. Every Gikuyu person will use the word meda. They don't They don't say, oh, this word is borrowed from the Portuguese or from the Spanish, right? They just, the word form, this one is even, you can hear it. For car, we say motoka.
Motoka.
Motoka. It's motoka, right? And now, so for agriculture growing up, motoka is, they don't even think twice about it. They don't think, oh, that sounds English. It just means that whatever that object points to, yeah. So languages do borrow words from each other. And it was a free communicative languages. There'll be no problem. Different languages would borrow the words they don't have for certain things from other languages. And there's nothing wrong with that, yeah. We can't even stop it. Huh? The word safari is a very Swahili word. Yeah, safari. It's a very Swahili word, safari, but now English people use it. Safari means journey, but now in English it's used specifically to mean going to see wild animals in Africa. Safari, yeah, but the same word now used in English in with a certain meaning. So language do borrow words from each other all the time, and there's nothing wrong with that. I have no problem borrowing words from Badinka into Gikuyu. Madinka, yeah.
How you're taking the next one?
Yes. Yeah, I just wanted to add that this might be a suggestion of thinking perhaps as linguistic entities, not as closed, but as having this wandering, traveling words, as being more of a continuum. But I won't take the time. I want to read, please, Professor Laura Doyle's question, which says, thank you so much for your thoughtful reflections. Do you have suggestions for how universities and colleges in any part of the world can begin to transform the place or understanding of language so as to expose and counter the history of violent colonization of the mind and body through language? Mm-hmm. That's Laura Doyle.
Yeah, I think universities can do a lot of things. You know, they may not be able to teach all the languages of the world, but they can try. You know, it's good, for instance, that Kiswahili now is taught in quite a few colleges in America, and that's a good thing. Yeah, I think we can do more languages being offered in colleges and universities. Even that alone, to climatize people that languages are languages and there's nothing inherently low or high about any language, you know, it would be very, very important. Yeah, yeah, for us, yeah, for the world, really, yeah.
Moira, you want to take the next one?
What?
You are on mute, by the way.
By the way, I see the car in Shona is motor, motoka, motor. From the motor becomes now, huh? So motoka, iko motoka, Shona, motor, right? Yeah.
If I could just say quickly, my grandparents were Sicilian immigrants, and they, my father grew up hearing Sicilian in the house, and one of the words that they used that he didn't realize was not Italian for a very long time was they referred to the back house as bacausa.
Bacausa.
Which is where people used to go to, you know, to I think like a bathroom, right? And he thought forever that bacausa was a Sicilian word, but actually it was just a reference to the back house, which it's sort of the same idea, right? Yes.
Yeah, once
Yeah,
the word has been absorbed another, it becomes part of that language.
sure. Yeah,
And there's nothing wrong, but
right.
as
Yeah,
I said, if because people also say badi for buses, a bus, just say badi.
yeah.
If you tell a person badi is not badi, it will sort of say, no, badi. For what? Yeah.
Anyway, I have another. I have a question from somebody. I just wanted to share that.
No,
Okay,
that's
greetings, Professor Ngũgĩ. This is about what you call the musicality of languages and its translatability. Assuming that there are no universal standards of musicality, what can we take for granted about the calculability of this musicality and human sensitivity to it, independently of the norms of conventional training and musical assessment that are established within such languages? How does one ensure that this musicality is transferable to a target language and its own range of sensitivities without appealing to pre-established disciplinary norms and rules of validation, including the colonial and hierarchical norms and rules of validation that one is trying to circumvent or those whose injustices one is trying to correct? I ask this question with the assumption that the ideal of musicality and sensitivity to this musicality have a lot about them that are subjective, even within the same language, and that it takes some schooling and regulation to make the assessment of such values possible.
Yeah, I think we can learn, honestly, I think we can learn a lot from musical instruments. Let me give you an example. The piano and guitar or violin, they can play the same melody. And you recognize that melody in the violin is the same melody that I heard somebody playing it. But the musicality is different. You know, no matter what, that is the sound of the piano and that's the sound of the guitar or the violin, okay? Guess what happens when they come together? Something happens. When you play the piano and the violin and something else, you get or orchestra. When they are placed in a certain relation to each other, orchestra. When the same instrument is in a different hierarchical position, they produce cacophony, harmony, cacophony, right? Same languages, you can have a beautiful orchestra and you want to hear, right? So that's really, I don't know. I think we can learn a lot from musical instruments, really. And remember, music and language have the same origins in the organization of sound in a particular way. Yeah.
Okay, do we have time for one more? All right. I'll ask this one from my colleague, Jeff Dykeman. He starts by saying, thank you for your time and brilliant writing. Do you have any advice for literary translators working on texts written in Black vernacular language? Do you think that one Black vernacular must be translated with another, such as translating Afro-Spanish into African-American vernacular? If so, is it possible for non-Black translators to produce such a translation without engaging in some sort of cultural or linguistic appropriation?
Well, I mean, the problem, I write in English, remember, and I do translation to English myself from Gikuyu, right? I think I would say, just do it, okay? Just translate into another. You don't have to must translate in every single language. My story has been translated into 100 languages. It's not me who did that. And the other thing, sometimes they had, it's very interesting. They had to use the English passion to access my original. Okay. There are some other interesting cases where I was told the Somali translation into Somali was based on the Arabic translation of the story. Right? So there are all these things which happen when we allow languages to be, yeah, right? The thing I would really say myself, I can't repeat this enough, is hierarchy of languages is really the real enemy, okay? Yeah, hierarchy of languages, hierarchy of cultures, and so on. Instead, we have a network of equal give and take. And that's a beautiful one, yeah.
Talking about give and take, so it's almost 6:30, and people have been extremely pleased, and you extremely generous to stay until now. So I just have a quick question before we close, because you're talking about give and take. In Mount Kenya, according to the Perfect Nine, is where God showed Kikuyu and Mumbi, the founders of the Kikuyu magical land, right? He was bequeathing them. So the issue of inheritance arises here again. And I was thinking about, this saying of René Char, our heritage is left to us without testament. And I wanted to ask you about how you see your legacy, your own legacy. What is being bequeathed, for instance, in this book, and maybe in your work in general?
Oh, I like, actually, I like the Perfect Nine very much, actually, because that's two things. One, it attacks, not attacks, but undermines patriarchy, because I think patriarchy is the original sin. And my 10 women, or my ancestors or my matriarchs, they could do everything. I mean, whatever, but they use their hands, they use their brains, they use their heart, and so on. They could think, organize, and all that. They could make things because they had no brothers to rely upon anyway. Right? So they had to know everything. So I like this idea of the community of women who are, and yes, undermine the whole patriarchy, that there are some things a woman cannot do or can do. I mean, it's also things we have developed because of a patriarchal system. Yeah. And I think Perfect Nine, well, at least if it helps in undermining that even a little bit, I would consider a great success. Yeah.